Thank you all for taking time out of your schedule and coming here. Today, my name is DJ, as Aaron introduced me. I've been working in the industry, film industry, for last several years. I've worked with Warner Brothers, I've worked with Time Warner, Disney, and now with Paramount. So I have like some good experience about production, post-production, marketing, distribution, financing of movies. So with that, I want to start this session, but I want to make a few points. First of all, I want to keep it very informal. I want to ask you to ask me a lot of questions. Whenever I'm talking about some process or whenever I'm talking about anything about the industry, just feel free to stop me and ask me any questions. Secondly, I wanted to understand a feel of the room. How many are the grad students here? And undergrad? And the faculty, okay. Cool. Okay, so let me start with, well, before the introductions, are you guys looking for anything specific? If anybody has a burning question, or if you guys want me to focus on anything specific, and let me know right now so that I can focus on that.
I hope we'll talk about distribution, how that's changing, how we're consuming content differently, the different channels that we might see it down the road.
Yes, that's one of the biggest trends. I'll say that's the biggest trend right now. And anyone else? Any other?
I think just generally going global, especially for Hollywood, how they're trying to get into China, India, and those markets.
Yeah, these are all the biggest trends, as you already know. Anyone else? Cool.
Supply chain, if it doesn't bore everybody else, other than my students who are here.
I work in supply chain, so I'll be happy to cover as much supply chain as you guys want. Just let me know when it's going too much.
If you have anything to say about big data and how that's interacting with the metrics and things that you guys are doing as far as trends.
Yeah, definitely. So big data and predictive analytics and a lot of initiatives are going on. So my wife, she also works for Paramount. She was also in her school, USC. So she is working on a lot of latest analytics initiatives at Paramount. So I have some idea about that. So we'll be happy to cover that also. Sure.
Yeah, just on the creative side of things, as all these other distribution channels make the barrier of entry is lower for like just a self-made creator, it seems like the big studios are even less risk averse now, taking artistic projects. So I just wanted to get your opinion on how you think, is that going to even go even further, and then they're going to lose their way completely to creative independent films, things like that?
Definitely. So let's cover that also. All of these would come in the way. I'll just start with the story. I'll start with how the movies are made and then what has been changing in the last few years. And one by one, all these come up. If they don't, just remind me again. All right. So already introduced, I'm an engineer by background and an MBA. Did IT consulting, and I've been in supply chain sourcing for past 6-7 years with all these studios. So, and I know that I only have 45 minutes, so I'm going to go a little quick. If you guys want me to stop and focus on something, let me know, and I can talk endless about any slide. Otherwise, there are a lot of slides. We don't need to go through everything, though. Just a broad overview. So entertainment is classified into a couple of different areas. So there's exhibition, which is exhibited then there. You go there, like theme parks and museum, you see it, and you come back. Live entertainment, they're happening at a time only, so concerts or like a drama or dance competition or something. And then there's interactive entertainment, where you're sitting, you're engaging. It's a two-way communication. It's like video games. You're playing with your VR apps or phone apps or anything. So that's interactive. And then mass media entertainment. So anything this is the biggest part, actually. This is what we are consuming most of the time all these days. This includes all the above formats, but they're broadcasted out to a masses. They're broadcasted through internet, or they're broadcasted through TV or through film or any other media. So they reach a lot more people than all the other events. All right, so moving on. So I just wanted to have this slide before going in, because entertainment is a very different industry than all the other industries that we have, especially the tech industry. And this presentation, I'm going to focus on how the tech industry is now merging with entertainment, the studios, and how it's transforming things, how Amazon and Netflix are just changing how the entertainment works. But traditionally, it's always the Rhine of creatives. It's always that people who are actors, directors, producers are the king. The relationships with people are the most important. If they have been working with somebody, they'll work with them. It's not a matter of what vendor or who is the person who they should work with. It's all about relationships from time to time. There's a lot of competition. The budgets are extremely tight, and then the time is money, because we have a strict window. Even though it seems like the creative have years and years to make a movie, it's a very compressed timeline. So you're always working and running against time. There's so many groups involved, hundreds and thousands of people involved, and depending on the movie, it could go from like few months to like few years to make. Anybody, can you guys guess how long it took for the Mad Max to be made? The whole process.
You mean from page to stage?
Yes, like from the inception, when the thought came to the theaters.
4 years?
10.
It's more than 10. It's like almost 15, 16 years. He had the script, he worked on it, he went back, he did something else. He wanted to shoot in certain location in Australia, in Africa. Then there was rains, so the landscape wasn't looking like what he wanted. So he went back a couple of years, and then he did some other movies, and then he came back. So it's a long story, but the process keeps on going and going. Here's a quick slide on the top 10 movies of all time, box office revenue-wise. How many of you have seen 7 of these at least? So you guys are the target audience of the studios. You guys are the guys who go frequently to watch movies every month or every second month in theaters and spend some money. And who has seen all the 10? Yes, these are the geeks, the nerds, and the real fans who believe in the movies. And I was one of those. I was like always drawn to entertainment. I always wanted to be in it. I never knew how I would be in it. But a small story, when I was in my MBA, I wasn't sure which career path I was going to take. I was going to be supply chain, but where I wasn't sure. One day there was a career trek organized by marketing students to Los Angeles, and they were visiting some studios. And one of my friends told me, and I was like, well, sounds interesting. I want to see Disney. Why not? And then I requested the marketing group, even though I wasn't taking marketing classes, and then they allowed me on a condition that I'll be like the silent guy in the corner, not open my mouth, not say anything, so that other people don't look stupid if I say something like that. But it was a great visit. We saw Fox, we saw Disney, we saw Warner Brothers, and after that, I just realized it's a beautiful place to work. It's an amazing place. For example, Paramount. You've seen the Hollywood sign. It's just like 2 blocks from there, a couple of blocks from there. It's a 62-acre lot. There are thousands and thousands of tourists roaming all around with guides, and guides are showing them, this is the place where Godfather was shot. This is the bench where who sat? Forrest Gump. Yes, they still have that bench. And there's a lot of other things. They have like the Transformer items here and there, props and archives. So you get to see all that. And Warner Brothers, they also have an amazing tour. If somebody's like really passionate about the industry and want to see how the movies are made, definitely go and take a Warner Brothers tour. It's a little expensive though. Anyways, moving on. Quickly, how a movie is made. It can be broadly summarized in these stages. There's conceptualization, pre-production, production, post-production, distribution, and syndication. Sounds pretty simple, but they're very complex. And it starts with conceptualization. Somebody has an idea. It could be anybody. It could be somebody in the studio. It could be just an independent writer, or it could be a third-party company, a vendor, anybody. Somebody who has a script. It could be a struggling actor. All my friends who are strugglers in Hollywood, they keep writing scripts. Who knows which one might be picked someday? Because there are a lot of scripts at work at a studio. Paramount any day has at least 200 scripts or projects it is actively working on. And all of them have assigned directors. Well, not assigned, like they're not contractually signed and blocked and everything, but they're attached to that project. The talent is attached to the project. They have attached which locations, they have budget attached, they have all those other information that comes with it attached to that. And then they're constantly trying to see which one's making sense now, which one's like more profitable. Everything comes down to money. even though we say that we want to make the best content, but it all comes down to money. Never ever will any studio head would say that this was a movie just made for artistic expression or creative expression. You only hear that from indie movies or small producer directors. So anyways, the conceptualization is that process where somebody sits together, brings everything together, has an idea, breaks it down into details, has all the information, including the data to back it up. Because when you go to a studio or when you're producing on your own, you need that kind of information to make a conscious decision to financially commit to a project. So this is very important that it be done in detail. And the greenlight process is something like this. This is a studio greenlight process. It's not usually how the smaller directors or like independent people work. But in greenlight process, the head of the studio has a team, and they have people from different groups. They have people from television, they have people from home video, they have people from theatrical, they have people from business affairs, they have production people, legal, finance, every division that you can think of, distribution, everything. They all sit together. And there's a formal meeting where the producers pitch that movie. They come with all the details, all the financial numbers. So they already have a projection of how much theatrical revenue it could expect to make. Believe it or not, even before it's shot, they know that this movie has a potential of making $35 million on the opening weekend, and they have it like down to the very details. Marketing and distribution, how much it's gonna cost. How much it's gonna cost, that's a big concern. Marketing is a big cost. How much it's gonna make internationally. Is it a US-focused movie? Or is it something which appeals to international audience like Transformers or Pirates of Caribbean? So marketing cost. Then the business affairs. Business affairs could include things like, do we have talent? Like, is Johnny Depp ready to work with us? Do we have tax rebates and credits in plan? Do we have like all the locations? Do we have the stages where we want to shoot? So that kind of business affair. And then the production. Do we have like the people who can take on this production? Because a production set need hundreds and hundreds of people every day. It's like a machine which goes 16 hours a day. Anybody who's worked in production would say that it's the toughest job. They work for like 3-4 months straight, 7 days a week, 16-hour days, and it's really, really tough. But again, that's how the production works. So, and then they have the home video. How many DVDs do we expect to sell? How many Blu-rays? How many Netflix views? Or how many OTT or SVOD? How many pay-per-views, or everything. They need everything, including the television. How much would be the network run? How much would be the syndication run? So they need to have strong analytics behind everything. Unless they have all this information, they can't go into that meeting with all the executive board. Once they're in the board, they have all this information. Sometimes they might not have all the information, so that's why this process is repetitive, and it goes on in a couple of phases. And then a single project could be discussed several times and not greenlit or greenlit. So that's how the movies are greenlit. And sometimes what happens, for example, let's take an animation movie. Animation movies are very different because animation movies they don't need to be shot. They're all created and animated on the computer screens through all these great apps and softwares we have. So we have something called pre-visualization. Even before an animated movie is greenlit, they need to have the whole movie in low resolution made already. It doesn't need to be final. It could be like very rough sketches just running around a cartoon movie, or it could be like much finer. These days, some of these movies are so intricate. Like for example, something like Avatar. Even before they shot Avatar, they had all their visualizations ready. So when the actors were acting out, they knew what the background would be in the back. So they were able to put that background when they were filming and then capture the face emotions and expressions of those actors. And this is a very commonplace thing right now. It's called motion capture or mocap. So, and for something which is a drama, they can't like visualize it, so they need to have like something called storyboarding. They need to have like sketches of where the camera is coming, where the actor would walk, everything. So there's a big storyboard. They take a look at it, they make some changes, and finally, then it is greenlit or not greenlit. Okay, I'm getting into too much detail, so I should move faster. So the next step is pre-production. Now there's a financial commitment from a studio or a smaller studio or some company to finance the movie. Now we need to actually get down, start hiring people, start putting everything together. So we set up a new company. This company that we create is just for that movie. If I'm making Harry Potter 6, the company name is Harry Potter 6, and it's a standalone entity on its own. Even though it's made by Warner Brothers, it would have its own profit and loss statements, accounting, and everything would be totally separate. The reason for that I'll tell later, but they'll set up the whole company. Second would be they'll come up with budgets and schedules, how they're going to produce it, shot it, edit it, distribute it, everything, up to the very detail. They'll hire the department heads. There's several departments they need to hire, especially in production. So it could be associate producer, line directors, and craft people, and then the decorators who set up the sets and everything. And then the creative planning begins. They already have a script. They have like a clear vision of what they want to do, but they want to make it as creative as possible in the budget they have been allocated. It could have been the case. They were asking for $150 million, and they were only given $70 million. So what do? You go back and make creative changes to your script and your movie and make sure that you are in that budget. So for example, and there's no strict rule. For example, Ryan Reynolds, when he went and pitched Deadpool to Fox said like, no way, we're gonna risk that much money on you. We still remember Greenlight and like all the other big failures that have happened in the past. So he said, why not just have a low budget movie? So they made Deadpool on a budget which was 1/5 of Batman versus Superman. And it's pretty similar. It's a comic book movie, but again, the budget was so low, and it still made more money than Batman versus Superman. So different studios have different ways of making it. And all these studios are going through a phase right now. For example, Fox is now headed by Stacy. She came in when Jim was moved out, and then Jim is now the head of Paramount. So he's bringing a new direction to the team. So all the studios are going through a lot of changes right now. And the reason for that is because the box office is falling, the revenues are decreasing, and there's immense pressure to create profits. Refining budget and schedules, depending on what you get, location-wise, production-wise, some budgets need to be adjusted up or down. If you're spending too much here, then you'll have to spend less there and everything. Then you secure the rentals, the props, the permits, the location, and everything else. If it's a film which is shot abroad, then there are like thousands of permits you need to get. That's why we try to not go out and shoot a lot, stay within the US, or go to UK, because UK has great tax credit and a very, very cooperative structure of the whole filming and production, so it's very easy for us.
Excuse me, what is it about Canada that seems so attractive? It seems like Toronto is a huge market.
It's tax credits and rebates. So what happened was in mid-90s, Canada realized that opportunity, that there's a lot of jobs that could be created just by offering tax incentive, because all studio wanted was a tax rebate or tax cut. So Canada in mid-90s incentivized them and gave them 20 to 30% tax rebate if they come and shoot in Canada, if they film in Canada, or if they post-process in Canada. And over the years, depending on which part of Canada it has gone up or down. But now they have so many of those incentives, even for video games, because video games are a lot of post-production also. They're kind of like animation and video games. They all go together, and visual effects. So all these industries, which are all similar, started going to Canada. And they were all called runaway productions. So the traditional home of all the movies and TV shows was LA, the Hollywood. But in the last 15 years, majority of productions have moved out. Somebody's filming in Canada, somebody's filming in UK, somebody's filming in Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, New York. Very few people film in LA now because of the tax incentive. So last year, I'll get to the tax rebate thing later, but it's the tax. And because the movies have such thin margin of budget that they want to squeeze every dime out of the process possible.
DJ, do you come in for the supply chain around step 6, or are you involved earlier in the pre-production?
This is pre-production, so we are not involved in pre-production. We get involved in non-creative items. So because we are supply chain, we are sourcing people, we can tell them how much to spend, where to spend, and which vendors to spend with, but it has to be not creative. We can't tell them like, hey, you're paying Brad Pitt too much. We can't tell them that, hey, this script is overpriced, or anything creative. We can't tell them like, hey, why are you shooting in Vancouver? Go to London and shoot, or go to Africa and shoot. So these creative decisions we cannot alter, but anything that's non-creative, for example, supply chain is the biggest spend that we have in supply chain is the DVDs. We spend more than $1 billion every year making DVDs and Blu-rays. And that's a pure manufacturing job. It's like, you hire a vendor, which is Technicolor for all the 5 of the 6 studios. Sony does its own because they own PlayStation, but everyone else does it through Technicolor, and Technicolor produces and assembles all the DVDs and CDs for the industry in Memphis. So we are involved in that. We are involved in logistics. We are involved in editing. So editing is borderline creative, because am I gonna tell them which company to hire for making a trailer? No. But can I tell them which company to hire for creating subtitles? Yes. So subtitles is not a creative process, but it still comes under FX. If I tell them distribution is not a creative process. It's transmitting from the source to the destination, and it could be done by any vendor. So that's not creative. Anything that's creative is usually out of our purview. Marketing is, again, borderline creative. So some parts of marketing are under us, some parts are not. We do decide which ad agency to work with and renew the contract once in a few years, but then all these ad agencies are very similar. So we can do a comparison and benchmark among them from time to time. So yes, we are not involved in any of these steps. The first time we are involved, well, this finishes with the hiring of the people and rehearsing before this starts. The third is production. Here is something which we are involved in. Not me personally, but some other people who handle production sourcing. Production is basically a shoot. Sometimes if it's a feature-length movie, it can go from 2 months to 4 months, depending on the budget. If it's like really heavy movie with a lot of production time and it needs a lot of effects and everything, then it could be 4 months, 5 months sometimes. The Revenant was like one of those infamous ones which stretched on and on and on for months and months, because the director was like, I'm not satisfied, I'm going to retake and retake. And if it's like a small drama, sometimes it's pretty easy. You just shoot it in like 2 months and get done with it. So depends on what it is. But on a set, there could be as less as like 10, 15 people, or there could be as many as like thousands of people. Even for the TV shows these days, everything is changing. The Game of Thrones, they have hundreds of people on the set, and it's a massive war effort. Every episode has a budget of $15 million. And $15 million episode is more than what Warner Brothers spends on the movies, the smaller movies. So every episode is like such a huge endeavor in itself. You should watch the making of every episodes they post on Facebook, and you'll realize how much work goes behind the scenes. They film like 8, 9 months before it is aired. And then they take forever, 6, 8 months to edit it. And then there's a lot of other processes going on. But production is among one of those tiring process, tough process. It's like 16-hour work days. But the world is changing because of Netflix and Amazon. I'll get to that later. Then comes the post-production. Now the movie's all shot. Now it's in the film. Well, it was used to be in film back in the days, 35mm. They would film it on 35mm tape and then store it. Now it's all digital, so they can shoot everything 365 times and not matter because there's no cost. Earlier, there used to be so much cost associated with shooting on film, converting it to digital, editing, and then sending all those films to the theaters. Every 35mm can is like this big and super heavy. And then there are so many of those which are sent to all those theaters. So there are some directors who really want to stick with that. Christopher Nolan is one of them. He did like a big relaunch of film with his Dunkirk. and he bought all the camera. So he got all the cameras, 35mm projectors back, and this was a very big release. So this was the biggest release in the last 2 or 3 years we have seen. But film is essentially dying down. But to be honest, the quality captured on film is better than quality captured on digital. But it's just too expensive, so nobody wants to get into detail. So here's a interesting part of the process, distribution. And this has been like completely revolutionized in the last decade or so, I would say. Because back in the day, things were much simpler. Movie was shot, released in theaters, and then it would go on TV, but that's about it. Now, once we have the movie done, then there's like all these teams. There's a distribution team, marketing team, publicity team, encoding team. Encoding means they're converting into all the different formats. The format for the phones versus the format for the airlines is all completely different. There are hundreds of formats, and converting them among format is very expensive also. Replicating is making DVDs and all, and then royalties and accounting. So all these groups get together, and theatrical is the release in theaters. That's how it happens first. For the first 3 months, it's only in theaters. And then it moves to DVD and Blu-rays, which you buy in all the big retailers, Costco, Best Buy, everywhere. The sad part is for the industry, I would say, back in the day, everybody used to buy DVDs. And when Blu-rays came, everybody went and bought Blu-rays. But now the trend is going down because everything is getting digital. And the DVDs were sold for like $15, $20. The Blu-rays were sold for $25, $30. And the cost of making them was hardly $1. So you can imagine the amount of profit made by studios back in the day. But again, there have been other avenues which has offset that kind of loss, which are coming from loss of those sales. And mostly they have been the online VOD providers. So there's Netflix, there's Amazon Video, there's Hulu, there's Vudu. Vudu is kind of a failed experiment. How many of you know what Vudu was?
Before? Now?
Now, Vudu.
I use Voodoo all the time.
Okay. So this was something which they came up with like 6, 7 years back on how they wanted to distribute the titles, but they were not sure how this industry was going to change. So they were experimenting with this technology, and Vudu is one of the, I would say, websites which is owned by Walmart. So they distribute it, and then there's a similar site for Best Buy. But that was called Ultraviolet. The initiative was called Ultraviolet. You would buy Ultraviolet, and you could watch your movie on any of these sites. So it's not limited to one site. If you buy it on Apple, you're limited to Apple. That's about it. But if you buy an Ultraviolet, you can watch it on all these websites. But it didn't catch up. So many reasons behind that, but a lot of the industry stars, like players like Amazon, Google, opposed that, and that's why it kind of like, it's almost on like a dying status right now. So, and then the other thing is satellite cable and all these. These are pretty similar to what we had before, the distribution, broadcasting, and syndication. But again, people are cutting the cords, and this is one of those things that you have been listening on the news. So after the movie's released, it's distributed, then there's syndication. It's a rerun on all these networks over the years, and again. It makes some money through advertising, but not much. But again, still makes some money. So moving ahead, any questions on the process?
Where do film festivals play into that?
Film festivals just play before the release of the movie. So once they are close to release of a movie, about like few months, like typically 4 months to 1 month before the release, they would want to drum up the marketing and PR. Some movies which are tentpoles start with their marketing like a year in advance. They'll release the trailer, they'll have like online presence, and they'll keep posting stuff to the fans, they'll have some spots on the TV. But the traditional way of promoting, especially the smaller movies, have been the film festivals. So about 3, 4 months back, you'll go to all these film festivals such as Cannes or like Vancouver, and you screen your movies. And the audience would be the people who are usually the critics or the industry influencers. And the incentive you have is that they're going to go back and talk about the movie. They're going to write it in their magazines or articles, or they're going to talk to somebody else who could help the movie in some other way. Sometimes the movies that are screened at the festivals don't have a distributor. So they need to find distributors, and nobody knows if the movie is good. So these festivals are a great way for these people, these producers and directors, to get the movie out to the people, such as studio heads. For example, Netflix is the biggest disruption. Again, I'm going to go back to that. Like 4 years ago, if I'm a producer, I create a movie with $15 million budget, like Arrival last year was something of that sort. Then I go and sell it through a film festival. I screen it, and then there's a bidding war amongst the studio. Whoever likes it, and then they bid on how much money they want to buy it for. And I think Arrival was sold for $15 or $20 million. That's about it. And then Paramount made so much more money on that later because it was a success. But that's where the producer get their money back. And after that, it's the responsibility of the distributor to spread it out. So film festivals are essentially very important for the smaller movies. But these days, with Netflix and Amazon, there's such a, I would say, there's a war going on about the content. Everybody wants to buy all the movies, even though they might be crap. So that's a different story. But traditionally, there are 6 studios: Warner, Disney, Universal, Fox, Paramount, and Sony. Viacom, all of these studios have their parent. So I work for Paramount. Paramount has a parent company called Viacom, and these are other brands. So the idea is that these studios are not standalone. They have all these sister companies, all these networks that they work together with. And they can use some of these networks for their own marketing and publicity, or for drumming up their support or something else, but some cannot. 2016, quick snapshot, Disney made the most money, 26% market share. Warner also wasn't far behind. Warner is usually the one with the most number of movies, so they release 25 movies, bigger and small. Out of them, about 16, 17s are the big movies, and the rest are limited releases. And the other studios are just far behind. This is just the $1 billion. And these are the top movies of last year. Again, some movies come and redefine the whole industry. And Star Wars coming back has just changed everything for Disney. Nobody thought it could be rebooted in this way. When Lucasfilm was sold to Disney, other studios were looking at it. It was just like Marvel being sold to Disney over again. So Disney is like right now the golden studio, which can do nothing wrong. Everything it touches becomes gold. And then you can see the second was again Disney, Finding Dory. Third was again Disney, Captain America. So the top 3 movies. And then 5th is also Disney. And then there were other ones also. 7th is also Disney. So it's like a monopoly. They don't release a lot of movies. They tend to release 6 to 9 movies every year, but their movies are just massive. The following is massive, and they get a wide release also. This year, till date, it's a close competition. Disney, Warner, and Universal, but again, there are a lot of releases that are up and coming, which might change all this. So we'll keep waiting. This year, the biggest movie has been Beauty and the Beast, and then the other ones. So this year is kind of like been the same, but domestic market is going down. That's one of the issues. So we'll talk about that later. Here's a box office gross map of how it looks like. Every weekend is different. This part in the middle, where it's like a lot of revenue, is the summer. Typically, more than 40–45% of the annual gross comes from this 4-month period. And then there's year end, and then some parts here and there which might peak, but it's very distributed. So how much a movie makes in domestic versus international is also one of the question. And how much is the money they make out of DVD and Blu-ray? So you see that it made $2 billion in theaters, but it only made $180 million out of DVD and Blu-ray in last more than a year. So it's most of the profits are concentrated towards the early window.
Where rentals fall into that?
Rentals would be again in the DVD sales and Blu-ray sales. So there would be still a component if it's a DVD rental. It's broadly folding everything under DVD sales, but yeah, that would be the rentals part. Because rentals are essentially launched at the same time and they work through the same window. So they're categorized there. Then all the studios have their own franchisees, and these franchisees are the ones that make them relevant. That's what's stopping a new studio from coming in and saying, like, I'm making something big, because they cannot depend on those. These are the franchises that we know for sure people are going to turn out and watch, and there's a security, a sense of security that prevails among the studio when they're making any of these. So these are very important. So I'm quickly going to talk about some more trends. Sorry, I got into too much detail about the process. The first one I want to talk about is globalization. So Chinese market has been really impressive. The annual growth rate, the box office growth rate is between 30 to 40% every year. Every year it gets 30% bigger. And the number of screens are increasing by, again, 30% to 40%. So Chinese market is just amazing. And when the Transformer 1 came out, the international and domestic used to be around 50-50. But in the last 10 years, now it's like 80-20 for a lot of the titles, then 75-25 for the other. So you can see the number of screens. These are the movie screens. In 2003, there were less than 2,500 screens in China. And it's a massive country. They had still 1 billion people back then. And in 2017, now they have almost 45,000 screens. So just imagine from 2,500 to 45,000 in like 15 years. It's a massive growth. And similar growth has been witnessed in their revenues. They didn't allow any movies to be released before 96 because they considered it propaganda. In 96, they allowed 10 movies to be released every year. In 2001, they made it 20. And now it's 36 movies that can be released from outside China. Anything that's a co-production is not counted under that.
How do they choose which movies can be released? I mean, there's probably a competition.
Yes, so all the studios have to go through a file, they have to file a petition. It's a very detailed petition which asks about the reasons and how that movie would benefit China or how the studio has contributed to China. Or the extent. So, and out of those, the Chinese government decide which ones are the most socially relevant or profitable for the market.
Is this the reason why they get more Chinese actors on board or they shoot a part of the movie in China so
Yes.
that they can attract
Great Wall, for example.
Yes. Great Wall was the first production that was directed by a Chinese director, but had the budget of $150 million, and it was essentially 1,000 people on the set, but it was a nightmare because first it was held up in scripting process for more than a year because the director wouldn't agree for the romance. He said that the older generation of Chinese people didn't had that kind of open sexuality, so he wasn't happy with that. So there were a lot of issues back then and forth. And finally, when the movie was in production, half the people on the set spoke Chinese and half of them spoke English. And then there were like the third half, which were translators. So it was just a mess to control all that process. The costs were really high. And when the movie released, it didn't do well in US. It still made 5 times more money in China than US, but it was overall not a successful financial outcome. And that's the same reason they're casting more and more Chinese people. Iron Man 3 had a 5 minutes extra storyline catering to some Chinese characters, which you guys never saw in US, because it was only intended for the people in China. X-Men, you see, Transformers had 15 minutes of extra footage just for China. So all these movies, they have some part which appeals to Chinese people, and then they put their own actors just to make sure that people go to theaters and watch it. And China has way more theaters than US.
So is it purely a numbers game? They just have more people, more theaters go, and that's, or is it a relative percentage of their population is going to see movies? The differences in trends between
people in US go to, yeah, there's difference in the culture and it's changing. So back in 90s, people in China didn't used to go to theaters a lot, but now, because they have so much money, because of the development they have witnessed, they usually go to the theaters and watch movies. The ticket prices are still low. They're like $2 to $3, but because the screen count is 43,000, and sometimes a movie releases in China at like 15,000 screens, and in the US, the number of screens is like 4,000 for the biggest releases. So you compare like 4,000 screens with like 16,000 screens. So even though the ticket prices are low, occupancy could be low, still they make more money. The amount of money that comes back to the studio is really low though. Studios get back 25% of that, and rest is shared by the government and the theaters in China. If it's produced together with a Chinese company, like the Great Wall, a Chinese production, then you can bring back 40% of the profit. In rest of the world, it's usually between 35 to 45%. And in US, all these studios get to keep 50% of the money the theaters generate.
Well, how do studios manage to stay ahead of competition when it comes to finding the distributors inside China or any other country?
So internationally, it's a challenge. 10 years ago, the studios were not serious about it because it was not a big market, but now there's a big international divisions because the growth in US is 1% or maximum 2%. In China, it's 30 to 40% every year, and it's changing. So they have now a very focused international distribution division, which is focused entirely on just strategizing for China, distributing in China. And then they are doing same for India, but on a very low scale because it's not a mature market, not a growing market yet, but maybe in future. So, well, the big markets are China, UK, Japan, India, South Korea, France, Germany, Austria. But the thing is, China alone, this year, Chinese market is 7 point something billion dollar, and American market is like 10. So it's expected that Chinese market would overtake the American market in 2018 or maybe 19 at worst. But there are some movies in Chinese market which are making waves, like The Mermaid, which was a Chinese movie, made $554 million. And that's really huge. And a movie, Dangal, an Indian movie, made about $300 million recently. So there are few exceptions which are coming from these markets. So I have a couple of slides I can go over, or I can take questions right now.
Let's just do like the last slide and then open it up for a couple minutes of questions. I know we have lunch out here and some students need to get to class.
Okay, so I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to skip through the slides, give you the name of the slides, and whatever you're interested in, you can ask me and I will just touch on that slide. Number of screens worldwide. Studio accounting, this is interesting because even though Harry Potter made $1 billion, the accountants made it show that it lost $167 million in returns. And that's for every movie. This was one of the rare statements that got leaked. That's why it's set up as an independent company. These are the tax rebates. The states that they're in blue have the tax credits, or the yellow ones have rebate, and that's why they are the new hubs. UK has really good tax credit right now. So all the movies, half of the movies or a third are being shot there. Physical sales, which used to be like 75%, would be down to 13% in a few years. And streaming, which was like 3%, would go up to 52%. So you can see the changing demographic. And streaming gives like pennies to these studios. So they definitely don't like streaming. If you download it or if you buy a title digitally, that's still okay. But streaming is their least preferred option. Technology upgrades, the 4K, 8K versus HD. Box office is falling. This year in summer was the lowest ticket sales in last 25 years in US.
It's hard for me to feel bad about that, right? Because you're still making $400 million, and gosh, you're making now $350 million.
The reason for that is because the ticket prices are going up, and then there are a lot of other avenues which you can distribute the content through. So even though the number of tickets are falling down, but you still kind of make similar amount of money, so it's not like the biggest concern.
Was it also because there weren't that many good movies that came out, like blockbusters, compared to the years before that?
So the answer is here. Do you guys think, these are the movies that came out in the last 4 months. These are like the major franchisees. all of them disasters. And you can see like Pirates, 80% of the Pirates and Mummy and Transformer gross came from abroad. And then Alien and Cars at least had decent Rotten Tomatoes ratings. So the reason, is it like too many franchise movies? People are sick and bored of it? The answer is actually no. Because if you make good movies, even though they're franchisee, they'll really do well. See the Rotten Tomato rating, 92, 82, 92. Well, Despicable Me is an exception.
What are the profit margins on these? We never talk about profit. How much are they making in profit after all?
So for a movie, even though I say the budget of Wonder Woman is $149 million, that's not what it costs the studio because the marketing is huge. I'm going to talk about that later, but I probably would not have time. So if they're making a movie for $150 million, they'll spend at least $100 million minimum on just marketing that movie. So they have to make back that $250 million, plus they have to make some additional money. And depending on if it's a theatrical release, then they get to keep 50% in US, 25% in China. If it's a DVD or Blu-ray, then there's big margin, versus if it's Netflix or some other streaming platform, it's very low margin. So depending on all those factors, these movies make some money, but Skyfall, for example, did $1 billion plus at box office, and it made almost $75 to $100 million, somewhere in that. It was in one of those leaked emails, but no studio ever tells anybody how much money it made. It's the best kept secret, because if they tell people, people would come and ask them royalties. And then you can't say like Harry Potter was in $167 million loss. So.
Do you feel like that's going to change though? Like with right now the lawsuit with Walking Dead, right? It's calling into question all the traditional financing mechanisms that studios can use in the supply chain, right? And they're calling BS on all those little additive things because it's all a wraparound studio. And so I wonder, because it's all basically legal precedents being set right now, how do you feel it's going to change?
It is being said, but it's a wait and watch game, because right now everybody knows what studios are doing, but it's their field. They have been doing it for last several years. Before 60s, the stars couldn't even work with other studios. They were like fixed, and whatever the studio would pay them was the thing. And over the years, it has gone liberal, but right now, even now, the accounting is very shady area. They never tell you how much money is made or lost. That Harry Potter was just a leak, so that's how people know. But there have been a lot of questions being asked on how much they're paying the writers and the actors, especially the women and the diversity people. So it's asking a lot of questions, and it would probably change for the better. But right now, it's very murky. Yes?
Is the joint finance production ownership model still pretty common and emerged?
Yes. So when a Warner Brothers makes a movie, it's not putting all his money. If Wonder Woman is like $250 million, then Warner Brothers is hardly putting $125 million, because rest of the money comes from its partner, which is some company, financing company. Same with all the studios. All the studios have their finance partners, be the big studios, or even if it's like a smaller studio, independent companies, they all have their partners, because they don't want to take risk of the entire production. So they tell somebody the idea, and then they get their money, and then they have a profit sharing mechanism, which is again very confidential.
I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, and then DJ is going to join us for lunch afterwards.
So do you want me to go through the slides? So, sure.
In the late 90s, I recall, there was a bit of a backlash against movie theater owners letting children in R-rated movies. The government got involved, and they seemed to want the owners to crack down more on checking IDs. And there seemed to be, in the years after that, a bit of a change from movies that might have been rated R earlier, in an earlier time, to start being rated PG. There's a lot of PG-13, kind of all these action movies and scary movies and sci-fi movies were PG-13. And I'm kind of seeing the opposite of that happen recently, like with Logan and Deadpool and whatnot.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you're seeing that, what are your thoughts on that, and if you think the streaming services might be to blame for that it's a lot harder to convince Netflix or Amazon to check IDs than it is as an owner.
You're right, and it's a kind of thing that comes and goes, because whenever something is working for the studios, they're like, great, it's going good. And when something fails, they're like, let's find a reason. Even though that might not be the reason, they'll find some reason and change that. So back in the day, they were saying, okay, these R-rated movies are like restricting the audiences and the young people can't go, so let's make everything PG or something very open. And then there were a lot of those movies. Some of them did well, and then some of them started failing. And now when some of the R-rated movies became a hit, and then people were like, oh, I love the language, this and that. And then the studios are like, okay, let's, all gears change. Let's try this thing right now. So it's a back and forth thing. They keep changing it, but who knows what's going to be in 5 years, because Netflix is changing the whole game, because I'm going to skip to the slide and show you. Warner Brothers turned them around, found a lot of new franchisees. The reason for low theatrical turnout is bad reviews, competition from online players, and the raising ticket prices, especially the 3D and IMAX. So Netflix is growing internationally more than domestically. It's huge. It accounts for 1/3 of traffic of Internet of America, spends an exorbitant amount of money, and uses very intelligent techniques to find content. Tons of original stuff, more than 127, I think 127 was the number of original titles from last year, 126. So you can see from in like just 5 years, it's gone from like nobody to now like the king of content. And okay, so how much these shows make after like so much time? Friends, right now, is making more than $1 billion every year. And all these actors get paid $20 million just because they were part of that. So, and with Netflix, it coming back on Netflix, it's making even more money than that. So if you get one good show, you're set for life. And here's the interesting slide. These are the players who spend most money in $1 billion on getting the video content. ESPN, sports, so it's obviously higher. YouTube shares it with all the creators, so it's very high. And Netflix at $6 billion. And you will not see any like studio that NBC comes like at 5th position, but it includes all the NBC groups, sports and everything. It's not just movies. And Netflix alone is spending $6 billion on movies alone and TV shows alone. Same with Amazon. Amazon is 4.5. Apple entered this year with 1 billion. So these things are changing. And now Netflix, back in the day when movies were being shot, studios would tell directors and producers and put a lot of constraints on them. What Netflix does is it signs a check that says like, go do whatever you want. So the studios are having a headache because the people don't want to work with studios anymore, because they want to work with Netflix and Amazon because they're really liberal. I mean, it depends on which production it is. But as I said, marketing costs are, again, as much as, or not, if not equal, then more than the budget of a movie. So some of them are like more than 100 million for Transformers, for example. People still value trailers. Trailers and the reviews are the #1 reason people go and decide on watching a movie. An average American goes to watch a movie once every month. An experiment which failed on somebody trying to market in a different way. But read about it, Logan Lucky, you'll find the details. Casting, diversity is increasing, income parity, questions are being asked, whitewashing is being asked, like why don't you cast Asian actors in Asian movies, and more scripts with female movies. The theatrical windows is closing down. A few years ago, it was 6 months. You could get the DVDs after 6 months. Now it's 3 months. And now the studios are trying to make it 45 days, which is making theater owners mad. And they don't want to let that happen. But it's going to happen anyways, because people don't want to go to theaters and watch that movie. One of the bigger disruptions that could change the market is MoviePass. It's a $99 subscription, and you can watch a movie every day in any theater, as long as it is 2D. I have this, and I've seen 5 movies in the last 2 weeks for $9.99. VR is a big technology. AR, mixed reality, is going to change the world in 3 years. You guys will see. Artificial intelligence is being made to create trailers and read the scripts and make movies. And NEUROCINEMA is something which might change the world. The computers would tell what movies to make. They will write the scripts based on what the scripts have been in the past. They can analyze. Watson is being used to do that. Watson created a trailer last year for one of the Fox movies. So in 5 years, you'll see a lot more of the AI and cinema moving to that side. Self-driving car would be creating a new $20 billion market because when you're sitting in the car, an average commute time is almost an hour for American. You won't drive, so your windscreens would turn into your TV screens, and then you'll be watching all that content, and that's gonna make studios rich again, so they can't wait for it. And there are tons of career options, be it finance or marketing or supply chain. You guys can go there, do the same job, but in a studio in a more cool environment. You can dress in jeans every day, go to work in t-shirts. Nobody asks. You will be creative. You'll have fun. A lot of perks. How to do that? Connect with more people. Stay active on social media. If you hear something, post something. So today, just go back, post something on your Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn about this session, whatever you liked, what questions you have, or research something, and network. Add as many people on LinkedIn as you can. I have like thousands and thousands of people, and I ask them informational interviews myself, and it's a big help, even now. That's how I've been jumping through studios, and I know like half the studios and half the divisions, even though I'm still in sourcing. But I know more about production than sourcing. And if you have any feedback or if you have questions, you can ask me later. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the patience.